Live streaming is on.
Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today is September 2021. We want to thank Clinton Ignatoff for helping us out, and I sure hope he's going to stick around because this is going to be a doozy there, Clinton. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Mark Kingwell. Is that the correct way to pronounce your last name?
Yes, it is.
Mark, what a pleasure and an honor. What's the best thing for a human being?
I would say sense of purpose. I wrote a book on happiness a long time ago, and I've talked to people for years about happiness. And I've come to the conclusion that, I mean, happiness is great, but a sense of purpose is more important. So, find your vocation and be a pirate for it.
Very good. And I'll just skip ahead to one question that I ask. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
The latter, meaning, definitely.
Yeah.
Happiness comes and goes. Even in the book, I talked about Aristotle's notion of happiness, which is eudaimonia. And it's not what we normally think of happiness today. It's more like being in tune with the universe. And I think that's important. But the fleeting moods are not that important. What's important is to feel like you're tuned in. And that's what I mean by sense of purpose.
I love it. That was great. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Well, that's interesting. I'm an old-fashioned guy. I read a lot of books, and I think that's still the main thing for me. I do spend time on screen. I watch television and track social media and so on. But I still think reading authors that I admire teach me more about anything else.
Did you grow up a reader because your parents were reading as an example? They told you to read, or did you pick it up on your own?
It's a great question. My father was in the Air Force, and he was, in a way, a frustrated academic. He got his degree through the Air Force, and he had been a monk before that. This is literally true. And so he was always a reader. My mother was not so much a reader, although there are some interesting details that I didn't know. She loved Scott Fitzgerald, for example. But I was one of those kids who had a flashlight under the blanket to read late at night when I was supposed to be going to bed.
Nice. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Well, I think most people are trying to make sense of their lives. We're only here for a brief time, and it's confusing and it's hard. And so I think people look to different sources to try to guide them. And often they look to bad sources, in my view. But I understand the impulse because we want to orient ourselves to the world, to the universe. So yeah, that's what I
That's
think
good.
of.
So, do you think this need or want to collect information is more hardwired, more innate, or more invented by
Uh, that's interesting. I think the human brain is wired to innately crave information. It's the way the brain is working. It's taking in a whole bunch of stuff all the time, and then it's processing, and then there are the usual things: a fight or flight response. There's a comfort response. Um, so it's not simple. I think on a daily basis, people are a little bit confused about what's going on with their cognition. Uh, And so I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that's kind of where I stand on it.
That was good because you must have ESP because you anticipated the next subjects. Do thoughts yeah, good, Mark. Do thoughts create emotions?
Absolutely, they do, and vice versa. This is a really interesting kind of dynamic. So you take in a piece of information, say, and it's intellectual or rational or whatever, and then you find that it has an emotional impact. Uh, by the same token, let's say you get angry or you get sad, that flows the other way because now you're trying to figure out why. And that's a different kind of philosophical problem or epistemological problem, I guess. And I find this all very fascinating. I don't do epistemology, I should say. That's a different subspecialty than the things that I do, which are political theory and aesthetics and so on. But I think that's really interesting, because there's been such a tradition of separating those two widely, right? So rationality on one hand, emotionality on the other hand. I just don't think that's correct.
Is thinking more innate or more invented?
It depends what we mean by thinking. Every human thinks. We all have large brains, and so we're processing the world all the time. But how you train yourself to think is a different issue. I'm a philosopher, so I've been trained in a certain kind of thinking. But when we think about, I talk about this all the time. We think about children; they are innate philosophers. They ask, when I see the color blue, is it the same experience that the other person is having? Why am I eating, this animal and not that animal? And they're really good, actually, at solving these problems. Um, and they have an innate sense of justice, which I think is really interesting. So the classic divide the pie problem, right? So what's the best way to divide the pie? And obviously, if you ask someone if you get to cut first but choose second, they will divide the pie equally. And that's just like a kind of mind, I don't know, not a trick exactly, but it leads right to very, very complex theories of justice, like in John Rawls. And so I love that.
Really well put. It actually just briefly reminded me of one of my favorite commercials growing up. The little kid asks his dad, "Where does bologna come from?" you know, and being both of us having an interest in McLuhan and studying advertising, that really says a lot, especially today. Like he's just being curious, but let's this is a line that Marshall completed, and I would love you to complete, fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I.
Oh gosh. I'm not sure I know until I'm told.
That's good. Well, no, you're answering it as you would say, right? Yeah, until I'm told. Yeah. But I did, like you said the word impulse. I said, I don't know what I think until I, oh gosh. That was your first answer. So that's it. We act on this first thought, best thought. Can humans think without language?
No, I don't believe so. There's something that we call the language upgrade, which is at some evolutionary point that no one can pinpoint exactly. The human brain or the primate brain, I should really say, acquired the ability to convey meaning in language. And that changed everything, really. And McLuhan was great on this point, obviously. So now we have a system of communication that goes beyond gesture and nonverbal communication. What I think is interesting is that we become a little bit too focused on language because nonverbal communication is actually hugely important, and it's under theorized or under misunderstood in everyday contexts. So yeah, I don't think advanced thinking is possible without language, but thinking, yeah, I think so. My cats, one of them is right here, but beside me, they don't have language, but they think. They make decisions, they make choices, and so thinking is possible without language. But advanced thinking, as we currently understand that, needs language.
Well put, Chomsky said a language is not just words. It's culture, tradition, unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. How do you cope when language breaks down? When language doesn't work, how do you cope?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Chomsky has been a little, uh, well, so we had the universal grammar theory, which I think was very influential. That the structure of language, no matter what the natural language was, had certain things, right? It had nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, and you could find that in every language around the world. When language breaks down, uh, it's tough. I mean, you have to try to find a way back to a kind of solid platform. Um, and there's a lot of work on what we call speech acts, which are linguistic gestures or interventions that accomplish things in the world. And sometimes that's the way back. So suppose I don't, well, actually, I was going to say speak French, but actually, I do speak French. But suppose I don't speak Mandarin. Uh, how do I communicate with someone? Well, there are a whole bunch of ways. And even if I only have like 15 words of Mandarin, which is about right, there's still a way to do it. Uh, I can get into a taxi cab in Shanghai and get myself back to my hotel with a series of gestures and a few, a couple of words. Um, so that I think that's what we do, right? It's kind of an interesting thing that there are so many natural languages around the world. And I know that people mostly think, well, English is the default language of the globe, but that's kind of colonial. Um, and a lot of people don't learn other languages, but there are these other ways to communicate, right? Um, we point, we make moves around our bodies, and that is communication.
Totally. Well put. Stupid question, but just in general, and I know it depends and it's both. Your observations of humans, are humans more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
That's a tough one. I think a lot of people don't think clearly. I hate to say that, but that's been my experience. So I don't know if that makes them more feeling beings. I think they're all thinking. I'm just not sure they're thinking clearly. And one of the things about being a philosopher, I suppose, is trying to teach people ways of thinking clearly. And by that, I mean not just, strict logic, but taking account of presuppositions and prejudices and trying to draw conclusions from premises. That's not easy. Yeah, that's something you need to learn, and that's, I think, part of the mission of doing what I do.
Yeah, I like how you articulate in your talks, Mark, what you do. It's like it's fun. It sounds fun, but it also sounds like the mission of every human on earth. I want to make the world a better place, you
Yeah.
know? And so, the garbage man wants to make the world a better place, and the highbrow millionaire artist wants to make the world a better place. But, who does it the best? Like, who really is efficient at it? Anyways, that was well done. Um, these are two Alan Turing questions from 1950. Is thinking a function of the soul?
No, I don't believe in the soul. I believe in something different, which is, even I should say, even though I was raised in a Catholic tradition, I'm an atheist. What I believe in is something that I would prefer to call the spirit, which is something like, old-fashioned Greek anime, like what keeps us alive. And I think everyone can relate to that, whether you're religious or not. And that is, what gets you out of bed in the morning, what serves your sense of mission, um, and what keeps you going, because life is hard, right? And then and then you die. uh, and so what you again, you have to find this sense of purpose to keep that going.
Well put. The second Turing question is, can machines think?
Yes, of course they can. We know that for sure by now. Turing, of course, was a pioneer of this whole discourse about artificial intelligence and robotics and machine learning. Machines can think. They make decisions. They can learn. They can do extraordinary things. We've seen this already, and we're going to see more of it. I'm actually writing a book about this right now.
Great. Just on the religion aspect for a second, do you pray?
Yes, I do pray. I know that might seem contradictory after I said I was an atheist, but every night I pray before I go to sleep.
Beautiful. And so the other one is, if God does exist, what would you like God to tell you after you die?
Well, I don't believe God does exist, but I would love some sort of voice to tell me that I've lived a good life.
Yeah. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Oh, usually trivial things. What I have to do the next day, emails I haven't answered. Stupid things like that.
I
Uh,
love I like people who use the word stupid. Like I loved when in your catch and release video where he goes stupidity. Frank Zappa says stupidity is the building block of the universe. They say it's oxygen.
yeah,
um, Mark, does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness?
creates. And
Yeah.
I'm one of those people. There's a school of thought that consciousness is an emergent property of brain function. And what that means basically is, if the brain is large enough and complex enough, consciousness will emerge and we'll have a sense of self. And that's why, so for example, like I said, I think my cats think, and I think that there are AIs that think, but they're not conscious in the sense that we usually think of it in the, let's say, the Cartesian version, which is
Yeah.
the ego, um, that is self-reflective. And so I think, yeah, in that sense, brain creates consciousness, or at least enables it.
Yeah. Enable. What a great verb. Uh, Audre Lorde said, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rayner responded, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
Huh. Um, I'm not sure how to answer that one. What I mean, I guess my always go-to answer is um, critical intelligence.
Yeah.
You know, we're stuck in a moment, not just because of COVID, but because of underlying structural conditions of techno capitalism that need to be examined and maybe dismantled in some uh, respects. And so we can use the intelligence that we've gained from what got us here to make a more equitable and just world. And I think there are a lot of people, a lot of theorists that I know and admire who are trying to do exactly that.
Yeah, Mark, one of the motives of my questions are to get the person to jump out of their stock lines. But your stock lines are so dang good and thought out. I'm happy we're documenting him here on Clinton's great station because it just seems it's organic and flowing how this is happening and you get it. So McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we can learn to cope with what we don't like about them.
Yeah.
So McLuhan, one of Marshall's main things was, why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects, even though we can turn to the artist to reveal them to us?
Yeah, this is a really important point. I'm an art collector. I have, I think, a very nice small collection, and that's exactly what I look for in art: is that sense of otherness and attention to detail. And I think because art is available to everyone, it really is an important kind of horizon of meaning. So not everybody can collect art because it can be expensive, but everyone can go to a gallery or an exhibition, and it really does this kind of perceptual thing where it changes your world. And I'll give you a quick example. So my spouse and I were in Paris, and we went to see the water lilies and Monet's masterpiece. And he painted that after the First World War as a kind of salvation from all the violence. And we were there. It was a beautiful day, and there was a group of students, and they were so respectful, so devoted to the art. And my spouse had a kind of breakdown. She started to cry. And it is, an amazing. It's not just a work of art. It's a couple of rooms, and I think that is essential to human existence, to have that kind of reflection on perception. And I think the same thing about the fiction I love, Proust, other people. It just I can't imagine existence without it.
Yeah. Yeah, like when a song makes you cry, it's just endless. But Mark, are you more afraid of old ideas or more afraid of new ideas?
Well, it depends what the ideas are, I guess. I'm not afraid of old ideas because I feel like part of my job is to process whatever they are. New ideas, I'm not so sure. There's a lot of rhetoric and discourse about, say, innovation, which I don't find congenial. But I think it's my job to process that too. So I don't think I'm afraid either way.
Yeah. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
I think one of my earliest ones was learning how to ride a bike. So that's not that early, I guess, because I was probably 11 or 12. Um, but yeah,
That's cool. It's the whole thing is basically the next question too is sort of stupid, but it's interesting how people tackle it. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
well, it's the burden of consciousness, right? I mean, I always think about the scene in Blade Runner where Rick Deckard says, we're talking about memories, and memories are consciousness. So it is a blessing because it's nice to be conscious, but it's also a burden because you have to carry all of this through.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking actually a lot about this in the last little while because I've been reliving a lot of moments and all the things that I've done and the good things and the bad things that I've experienced. And I don't think there's a simple distinction between good and bad there. I think it's just who we are.
Yeah, well put. Tell me an early role model, just briefly, within your immediate family, someone who had an impact on you, and what specifically was the main impact? And then outside your immediate family.
Okay, so in my immediate family, it was my Uncle Brian, who died recently. He was my godfather, and he wasn't at all intellectual. He had no interest in reading or anything like that, but he was full of joie de vivre. Um, he was extremely funny, and I loved him deeply. And then he later in life he got Parkinson's and he died a couple of years ago, and that was a real tragedy for me.
Wow.
Um, outside my immediate family, I would say there was a teacher I had, a professor, uh, who um, I didn't know this at the time. He had flown in the Royal Canadian Air Force like my father did. He was a navigator, and he won a Distinguished Flying Cross for actions during the Second World War. What I knew him for at the time was he was a great teacher of Kant and Hegel, and he opened my eyes to those German thinkers. He was also the last professor I ever had who wore a gown in the classroom, and his name is Kenneth Schmitz, and I admired him tremendously. I think he's probably the reason I stayed in philosophy.
Well done. Thank you. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I think evil people exist. I think there are people who don't have a moral compass. You know, there's been a lot of literature about sociopaths and other kinds of psychological dysfunction, psychopath. And if evil means anything, I think it means that. I'm not a big fan of the category of evil as such, if it's reified. But I do think there are people who just don't understand the difference between good and bad. And I think that makes them evil.
Yeah. How do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? This one I'm going to set up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini said, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question, Mark, is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to the Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, I think that's true, actually. And it depends on the setting. I mean, if you are at war, then the empowerment doesn't matter because you're at war and dealing with the enemy is first priority. I think in everyday life, it's a different story because when you think of someone as an enemy and you acknowledge that, then I think you give them too much power over your own well-being. So that's my thought on that. There are different notions of enemy, I suppose.
Yeah.
I do think that there are enemies. There are foes to be opposed, and there are friends to join in that opposition. And it sometimes is not that clear. That's part of the problem. Right? I mean, who is my enemy right now? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to keep the thought in mind that we have to fight. We have a saying in Canada, because it's a hockey mad nation, that the rink is not round. The rink has corners, and sometimes you have to go into the corner and fight. And I think that's kind of important because you don't want to just fight for no reason. But if there's a reason to fight, then you should fight.
Yeah. Thank you. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin over 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
That's a great question. I think this goes to something I'm very preoccupied with, which is the idea of representation. Yeah. So one of the things I think about, there's a whole bunch of things, layers in there. Live theater is a beautiful experience, which we have been deprived of for some time, because you get to see real bodies on the stage. And yes, it's fiction, but it's depicted and structured. And the old Chekhov thing: if a gun is shown in Act 1, it has to be used by Act 3. So there's a narrative structure there, which makes a big difference. And I think with cinema, it's more than just representation. It's the creativity of layering, and I think we've seen that actually over the last while because people have been watching a ton of Netflix and whatever, and all of this great television and film, and it's a kind of different way of switching your perception about the reality. Yeah. So Joyce's thing is true, but not quite accurate, because it's not just the tree you're seeing, right? You're seeing, I don't know, um, something climbing the tree, or whatever's going on around the tree, and all of that stuff. So I think we're again, this goes back to the cognition point. I think we're hardwired, once advanced, to really, really enjoy and get wisdom from these kinds of representational media.
Yeah, that was good. So, you sort of touched on this, Mark, through your professor, but what first attracted you to pursue philosophy as your career? Like he was introducing you to Kant and Hegel and these, and then you go, well, I can do this. I can be a teacher, and I can, this is my calling. Sort of walk us through that calling. Did you go to college specifically? And, just the sort of through line on how you got to be the professor you are.
Sure. Well, it goes back to an earlier point. I entered university when I was 17, and I was preoccupied at that time with the question of the existence of God, because I had come from this Catholic family and Catholic high school. And I was never sure about the arguments that I'd been told prove God exists. So I enrolled in some philosophy courses, and uh, you know, Thomas Aquinas and Anselm and all of the classic literature about the existence of God. And then I just got hooked. And I was a double major in philosophy and English, and that's kind of basically continued all through my life. Um, so when I finished my undergraduate degree, I had some professors who encouraged me to go to graduate school, and that's what I did. And uh, when I got to Yale, uh, I became basically a classical political theorist, and I had some great supervisors there, and uh, and that basically leads me to where I am now.
Well, you also are an author of many, many books and amazing output. A screenwriting teacher told me a great art, great book, or great film is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Stanley Kubrick says the opposite. Great art or great film or great book is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process, writing books?
I love that question. And I should say, by the way, a couple of my books have been optioned for screenplays, but have not uh, come about. Uh, I think both things are true. I mean, some books that I've written have clear intentions. They're arguments from point A to point B, and then there are other books that are more uh, circular or reflective, meditative. And I don't know if that would make a good movie or not, but I like both kinds of books, and I appreciate both kinds of writing in other
Yeah.
writers. So there are people who are very, very directive and straightforward. I'm thinking of, say, Daniel Dennett. I don't know if people know his reputation. He's a great writer, great philosopher, and he relentlessly moves down the argument. And then there are others like Stanley Cavell, who's also a great writer and philosopher, no longer with us. And he does this kind of circling, and I love that too. So I guess I'm not sure how I would go go about categorizing my own books, but I think both approaches are very, very meaningful, and they can be very, very enlightening.
Well done. I just found a Stanley Cavell book in the garbage and I started reading it. I was like, this guy's amazing. And it's about cinema. And I mean, he is deep and it's small and, to the point. But again, it felt like you said the word circle. Um, Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your readers when you're writing your book?
I try not to do that too much because I think it can bind you up a little bit. Um, and it depends on the book I'm writing. So I just published a book with Oxford University Press on the ethics of architecture. Clearly, the audience for that is specific to the profession, and maybe some people interested in architecture outside the profession. But a lot of my books have been more general, and I just hope they reach rather the so-called educated reader. I'm not sure that that person exists anymore, but I really don't think about it too much.
Yeah. Well, that was great bringing up architecture's deep because Winston Churchill said, we shape our buildings, then they shape us. And
Yes.
McLuhan, in his brilliance, said, aphorisms are all about rewording them. Just don't settle for this cute little insight, reword them. And he said, we shape our tools, then they shape us. So, the whole line. Teeth, we extend our teeth with knife and fork. We extend our skin with our clothing. We extend, the shutter of a camera or projector with our eyelid. What does the writing utensil extend for you, whether it's a pencil, pen, or a keyboard? What humanness is extended? I like
Yeah.
Marshall said human sensorium, and then I sort of shifted it to humanness. So, it's hard to communicate to people who don't understand McLuhan, but in your case, what do you think? First of all, before you answer, what do you think I should stress more, humanness or human sensorium?
I think humanist is the right answer because
Yeah.
sensorium sounds technical, and it's also a bit limited, right? Because it's
Yeah.
just the senses.
Yeah.
Uh,
I agree.
and so to answer the question more deeply, one thing I think about a lot is extensionality, and a lot of people since McLuhan have talked about this. Great philosopher Andy Clark has written about this. So extension of consciousness can be something as simple as a cane if you can't walk straight, and so your mind is directing the cane to negotiate the physical world. uh, or it can be as simple as leaving a note on your refrigerator, which is a temporal extension, because next day you'll remember to go and get a grocery or whatever it is. And so I think about this a lot. And in terms of my own work, I mean, obviously, it seems to me that writing is an extension of both space and time. Uh, you hope your books will stick around, and they will be taken up. Maybe they won't, doesn't matter. But the idea is basically to create a space for your discourse and then push it forward in time.
Super, Mark. This is so enlightening. And you brought up the word moral compass, which I sort of like those words, but I just added this question, and I'm curious how you would respond. Do artists have a moral obligation?
No, I don't believe they do. I think that artists have an obligation that's entirely aesthetic, and any moral dimension that they may wish to add is fine. But if they don't wish to add it, uh, we'll take the work as it comes. And you might learn moral lessons from it, or you might not. Uh, I think, I don't know. I'm very very neutral on this part of aesthetic production. I just, there's even beauty is not an obligation. There's lots of um, non-beautiful art that is terrific art. Uh, it's a long standing discussion, but yeah, no, I
Well,
don't.
well done, Mark. And what's another word for aesthetic? If someone said, "What do you mean by aesthetic?" What's another word or two you would say? Aesthetic obligation, aesthetic.
Yeah, that's tough because most people would say beautiful.
Yeah.
But I mean, literally, aesthetic means feeling. So,
Feeling.
uh,
Wow.
because, anesthetic is the opposite. That's what you get when you go to the dentist or whatever. So, yeah, feeling.
Oh, that is so, you really taught me a good, because I was going to say what you were talking about there reminds me of John Waters, the filmmaker, said he rooted for the Wicked Witch of the West in Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
You know, now did he grow up and is he a bad person? No, he's a good guy, you know. I mean, his films are weird, but just that he did that, you could say, "Oh, you rooted for the wrong one," you
Yeah.
know. So,
I think that's great. I actually met him once. We were both at a conference in Winnipeg, if you can believe that. And he was exceptionally charming and very, very, very funny.
he's fun. He's brilliant. But I also got to compliment you on your interview with Cronenberg, getting him. I mean, this one paragraph you got him to say, or you didn't get him to say, but you sort of, it's in your interview with them. It's just mind blowing about extending the organs,
Yeah.
the whole McLuhan thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
If I might just jump, and I don't know if it was in the piece that you saw, but I had a knife with me, and I just wanted to show him this knife. And it was this kind of, think about the body, right? I mean, think about corporeality. And he's been so amazing at exposing the limits and possibilities of corporeality.
yeah,
And he's another huge influence on my thinking, definitely.
yeah, yeah, we're lucky because he, you know, he has a line in one of his early films in the trailer. I used to show it, and I literally use the line in the trailer for my film. It says, "If you don't squirm when you see this film, you better go see a psychiatrist." I said, "That is great writing." And he did say in your interview with him, "I regret that I never took a course with McLuhan."
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
so
But
that was great. Go ahead.
well, I was just going to say he didn't really need to. I mean,
No.
it's all. We sometimes call it the Toronto School. It's not just McLuhan. There's Harold Innis
Yep.
and a couple of other communications theorists. But Cronenberg is he's a product of that, and so am I.
Yep.
And yeah, and by the way, I teach this course on film and uncanniness,
Yeah.
and I usually show his Dead Ringers, which I think is, I'm not sure it's his best film, but it's the most uncanny because Jeremy Irons plays twins. I don't know if you've seen it.
I know about it and I should see it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Super. So another filmmaker, Michael Apted, who just passed away 35, 40 years ago, I was talking to him and I said, why? This is when MTV was breaking. Why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? He said, because we've learned to take in information faster. I mean, Marty Scorsese said, I'm cutting my films faster because of MTV. So I asked this question with a bias. Can humans literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
I really don't know the answer to that, but I do take the point that cuts are much faster now than they used to be. If you watch Turner Classics, you see much slower takes. The
Yeah.
scenes last longer. Um, I mean, I kind of like the dynamic style. I'm not sure about taking in information. It's not. It's more like I don't know,
Yeah.
snorting coke or something.
That is great. I like that. I mean, I like that you said that because it is, I you should see how people go back and forth on that. So like, and the majority of my questions get about 80%, like Lily Tomlin said, reality is a collective hunch. They all sort of hunch a certain direction. So
Yeah.
I'm always appreciative when people go, I don't know, or they say something that's not what the norm. But most people don't know Abel Gance was basically invented fast editing in 1922. It just wasn't dominant really until about MTV, where it was in our face, just this fast editing.
Yeah.
But the hidden, I mean, the real hidden ground question I'm trying to get at is it literally possible to multitask?
Well, I mean, there's good evidence that it's not, and I talk to my students about this all the time. So we have technology to disable online access during lectures, for example, but I don't employ it. I figure, if they want to, I don't know, play Minecraft or whatever while I'm lecturing, I'm not sure that actually impairs their ability to hear what I'm saying. And one thing I've learned from online education in the last year is in large classes, I had a class of about 130, and only a few of them showed up for the what we call the synchronous session, the on time session. But we record them, and I learned that most of them were listening to them at like 2.0 speed. And
Right. They listen to them faster. Right.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And people do that with podcasts and all kinds of things. Uh, I don't know. I mean, I really like the idea of singular concentration, but I also think that a little bit of side distraction might help you function better. So I don't know if that counts as multitasking because you're doing one task and then there's a little bit of distraction. It's almost like having music in the background or something like that. If you're trying to do two tasks or three, there's probably a diminishment of execution there.
Yeah, it's like I've lectured, and if a student is taking a pencil and writing, I don't get upset. But if they're doing this or this, I mean, I don't get upset, but I'm distracted. Now they could be writing a love note with their pencil or doing something like Minecraft or whatever, not but my prejudice is the visual is that the movement of their fingers with a pencil is different than typing on a screen. So, you know, who knows? And I love your idea of side distractions. That's like George Carlin saying, whatever happened to letting kids stare out the window?
Right, exactly.
you know. What was the motive of the cave artist? Just your hunch.
You mean the old cave artists, the
Yeah.
ones in yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they were depicting hunts mostly, and it was tale telling. It was stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so when you come back from the hunt and you want to tell the story of it, uh, you know, um, you put it on the wall, and we still do that. So
Yeah.
that's what I think about that.
Mark, what's more important, conviction or compromise?
Conviction. Compromise is a secondary goal. You have to believe in what you believe, And then if you meet other people who believe differently, then you work on compromise. Uh, so it's a two-step process. It's really, really important, I think, to believe firmly in things. I don't mean to be, you know, eccentric or prejudicial. I just mean know your own mind. And then, yeah, when you meet somebody else, which you're going to do in democratic society, talk to them and see what they think, and then go from there.
You've accomplished a lot. How do you rate these three elements, luck, skill, and ambition? What played the biggest role second and third?
Huh. I think I'd put those in exactly the order you did. I had very, very good luck in the opportunities I had. And then I had some skill in executing what I was doing. And then ambition came into play. And now I'm not so sure about ambition, to be honest. It's a strange property. I don't feel ambitious anymore. I don't have any big goals that I'm striving for except to hold the course and do what I think I might be good at. So, but luck, yeah, luck is first for sure, because there are so many things that might not go your way, and when you find yourself in a good place, sometimes it's because of what you have done, but a lot of times it's because of the universe allowing you to be there.
Your observations of humans, is ambition based more on fear or more on joy?
Fear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just think a lot of the people I know now, especially my younger students who I admire tremendously, they have a great deal of fear. And a lot of it is just little steps. You know, they want to get into a PhD program, for example, or they want to get hired for an academic job or some other job. And even my two stepdaughters, who have done quite well in their lives, there's, yeah, tremendous amount of fear, and it's hard to watch, but I understand it completely.
Yeah. T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Well, you know, there's a philosophical term called mentalese, which is a kind of internal monologue that isn't in a natural language. But I have to say, I've never quite believed in that because my inner dialogue is all in English. and and I do this thing that I think a lot of people do, which is I rehearse things before I say them. So if I'm heading into some kind of conversation, or you know, even in an exchange in um, I don't know, a store or something, I already have
Yeah.
dialogue. Yeah, so it's in English.
Yeah. So a couple experimental filmmakers I'm fond of, George Manupelli, his mantra was ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. And the great jazz pianist Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. This is another question. It's stupid. It's both and it depends. But just in general, is art making, book making, filmmaking more self expression or more vehicles for whatever dominant culture or technology is present?
That's a great question because I have to say I've been thinking a lot about this too, writing my current book. Um, I'm not sure I really believe in the self in some old-fashioned way. Uh, I wouldn't say I'm a vehicle exactly. I mean, I'm channeling it. But the idea of self seems more and more unlikely to me as we go along. And I think this is, for me anyway, partly because I'm writing about artificial intelligence and machine learning. I don't think self is all that important. It's kind of a indulgence, and people overindulge it. Me time, and my generation, and things like that. So when it comes to art, I mean, I think it's different in different mediums. In music, for example, Glenn Gould I wrote a book about him. He liked to say he had no self when he was at the piano. It was just the music and the keyboard. And with writing, it's a bit different because you're choosing the words, you're making things up. Um, so I think there's some wisdom in those quotations. It's very hard, by the way, to talk to other people about this, because it's like, well, of course I have a self. Uh, but
Yeah.
I think it's a fluid concept, maybe is the best way to say it.
Fluid is great. I got to tell you one Glenn Gould thing. When I was a kid, raised in Michigan. We went on this vacation up to my relative's um, lake, on the lake that he lived on. And I was like, you know, I forgot the name of it. Do you know Lake Simcoe or what?
Simcoe.
Anyways,
Yeah.
Simcoe Lake. And I was just getting into this world where I was going to jog. So I jogged or like around the lake or around part of the lake. And in retrospect, I was always like, maybe I passed Glenn Gould. I could have said hello to him. Like in retrospect, it would be so great to just have a normal encounter with him without knowing it's him, or he knows who he is and all that. But the real hidden question for that question was, can art making be egoless?
Yes, I think it can. I think there are people who, there are some crazy theories, like Yeats had this thing where he was just the channel for some universal consciousness. I think that's not quite right. But I do think there are ways to make art where the ego at least is in the back seat. I'm not sure it's
Yeah.
technically egoless,
Yeah.
because you still have to be the instrument. But I love that idea. I really do. And so, yeah, again, it depends on the medium.
Yeah.
But poetry is probably as good an example as music. It's a cliche, but it just kind of flows through you.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, Mark, because 80 to 90% say, no, you got to have ego to make art. And then one person said it so well, they go, good art is egoless. But it's interesting. You suss it out. But I have to do this one follow-up. Was Freud right?
About the ego?
Yeah, that's the trick question there. People, about what? Or just in general, was Freud right?
Well, I teach Freud often, but not usually on the basics. I'm really interested in his social philosophy, which people neglect. Um, so was he right? Uh, he was as right as anybody else.
There
When it,
you go. What an answer. Mark, I have to say this because I get emotional sometimes doing these. You feel like a wise old, not old, but I mean we're probably the same age. You feel like a wise priest, because I grew up Roman Catholic too, and it was like, you know, we looked to our priests as role models, and they were like wise, and we trusted them. And there's something about your demeanor that really gets me. Like, I can turn to you and go, oh, Mark will give me the, wisdom. So I appreciate, because a lot of this is all about the demeanor that we exchange in this time together. It's not just the words. So the next question is perception reality?
No. Uh, Reality is a construct. Um, Sorry, I just had to mute my phone.
That's all right.
There were multiple realities. I had a professor once who said there's only one reality. And I remember thinking that just doesn't sound right, uh, because I feel like I have multiple realities on any given day. And I know that other people's reality is different from mine.
Yeah.
So the construction of what we call reality is about the relationship between individuals and the world. And we negotiate that all the time, both between ourselves and the world and between each other. Uh, and what else to say about that? I mean, this goes back to Plato, if not earlier. How do you tell the difference? Well, you only tell the difference when you can feel the difference. So, I think about the parable of the cave in Plato's Republic. You're down in one reality, you're looking at these reflections on a wall, and you think that that's real. And then somebody, releases you from that imprisonment, and you go up out of the cave, and you go through all of these trials and tribulations, and then you come out and the sun is shining and you're blinded, and that's supposed to be reality.
Yeah.
And it is in a way, but what if there's another cave waiting for you? So that's how I think about reality. I feel like, as I said, I think it's a negotiation.
Yeah. Why is it so difficult for humans to consider the possibility that life may be pointless? I'm not saying life is pointless. I'm saying, why is it hard for humans to consider that?
Well, I don't think life is pointless either. I think that it is difficult. And, I didn't know that you had a Roman Catholic background as well as me. Uh, but religious traditions grow up because they want to give people a sense that life isn't pointless. And that, I think that's, personally, I think that's an illusion. But it's very important to feel like your life has a shape, and that you do something that's meaningful. And it can be very small or very large. There are people who are world leaders who changed the shape of the planet and the future. And there are reformers and activists who change right now. And then there are people who just live their lives with conviction, and they have families, and they
Yeah.
do their jobs well, and uh, that's all good. So,
Yeah.
but it is hard because people, I don't know, I guess I've never really felt this myself, to be honest. um, but there are people who feel like there's a kind of pointlessness. And this is kind of a dark topic, but I've known a few people who've taken their own lives. And, there can be lots of different reasons why that happens. But sometimes it's because they feel like life is pointless,
Yeah.
and they don't want to go on any longer. And that's very tragic.
Yeah.
Um, but it, we have to stay in the fight. because this is the only fight we've got.
Yeah. It's well put, Mark. Can you forget to die?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Can you forget to die?
I'm not sure what you mean, Jerry. Forget to die.
It's a question I picked up just in the last 2 years, and it's interesting. Can humans forget to die? There's like, I'll send you some of the quotes later on where the question morphed from, but Zizek's talked about it a little, and it's just, can human, and I actually just navigate me through this. You said you said philosophy has been called the art of learning how to die.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Well,
I mean, you could just relate the two if you want, or just go on this.
okay. Right. So what I wrote, that's from Socrates.
Yeah.
Forget to die. Yeah, I mean, there are at least two different versions that come to mind. One is the 19-year-old soldier who thinks he's going to live forever, but doesn't. And then I think there is there's the so-called you of happiness. So people start out pretty happy in their 20s, and then they go downhill because of all the afflictions of life, and often bottom out in, say, their 40s, and then they climb back up, just mostly because they're sticking around. And I think those people, I'm thinking now actually of my father, who's 88, and I think he's done that. He's going to die probably pretty soon, but I think he has forgotten, um, in the sense that it doesn't trouble him anymore. So that's a
Yeah.
different version of the other side of the you, right?
It's good.
Yeah, one is you're going to live forever, and the other one is I've lived and that's it.
Yeah.
So if that's what forget to die means, I don't know the Zizek uh, uh,
I'll
reference, but
send them to you. There's a couple of them that it's a funny little thing. Anyways, if you were walking down the street today, Mark, you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
well, the first thing I would say is you got to lose some weight because I was a fat kid. And the other thing is, I would say, uh, think about what you want to do with your life, because I had no idea when I was 12. I was a nerd in all kinds of ways. I was a Dungeons and Dragons nerd. I was a CB radio nerd. I was just kind of all over the place. And so, yeah, I would say think about what your purpose might be.
Beautiful. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness that you've turned into a strength.
I would say my anxiety. I have a lot of anxiety, uh, but I've tried to flip it into productivity and attention to detail and other kinds of constructive qualities. So, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I have these crazy thoughts. What did I do? What did I not do? Uh, to make that a virtue is an ongoing project, but I think that's what my answer would be.
Yeah. And we know in the McLuhan world, he said it so well, turn a breakdown into a breakthrough. So, Mark, in your decades of writing books, 20 plus books or near that, tell me one major element and your pursuit of being a philosophy professor. One major element that stayed the same and one major element that's changed.
Well, I think the major element that's stayed the same is that I just love to write. I love crafting sentences. I love paying attention to structure. Um, what has changed? I guess what has changed, I mean, this is not really about my writing career, but I used to do a lot of television, and I have zero interest in doing that now. I love this, what we're doing, but I used to be on TV almost weekly, and I grew very, very tired of that. So
Yeah.
that's a big thing that's changed.
It's great because basically what we're doing is live TV right now.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it's a little more like public access, casual than, a big studio. So, Mark, anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
Well, when it's turned into something like focus, we all know psychologically that anger, when it's frustrated, becomes depression. And that's the worst thing that can happen. So when you can't express your anger, or you're suppressing it uh, for some other reason, uh, it does lead to depression. So if you take anger and make it into something like focus, then it's good. And you know, I was joking with my editor at the Globe and Mail recently that I wake up angry and I go to bed angry. And she said, "Of course you do." uh, so I put that into my newspaper columns and hope that it works out.
Yeah. Well, I'm a newspaper person. I should be reading your column. I think newspapers are super important still, and it's just sort of thank God there still are a few good ones around.
Yes, indeed.
So these are 5 Alan Watts questions, just really short and brief. Who started it all?
I don't know what to say to that one.
Are are we going to make it?
Yes, humans are good at innovation and survival.
Where do we put it?
In the right place.
Nice. Who's cleaning it up?
Usually we think it's somebody else, but it should be us.
Nice. Is it serious?
Sorry, say again?
Is it serious?
Yes, it's definitely serious.
Really good. I'm going to ask you a few more, then we'll bring Clinton in. This has really been fun, Mark. I really appreciate your time and energy here. What's the most significant difference between women and men, physical aside?
I don't know. I think the gendering of humans is not very helpful.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to repeat any cliches. I think uh, I would say something like this: that shared vulnerability is what joins us together.
Yeah. There's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right, dude. This one is like, you create what you resist. That's a saying. Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into you are what you hate. James Joyce said, it's a curious thing. Your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, thank God I'm an atheist. So I'm not asking you to agree or disagree, but what do you think of this line? You create what you resist, or one creates what one resists.
Yeah, I think you need some push off. You need uh, some resistance in the sense of what gives you tension to go forward. When I was very young, I was on a swim team, and what I loved, I loved the swimming, but what I really loved was doing the flip turns on the wall, and that feeling. And then you go down under and you do dolphin kick. Um, that was my favorite thing, and I think about that all the time. So yeah, I push off against things.
Nice. Mark, on what occasion do you lie?
I don't lie.
How do you find peace of mind?
Well, my favorite moment of every day is when I go to bed, and that's when I achieve peace of mind. And of course, then I wake up later. But um,
You mean in the middle of the night you wake up?
yes,
But that is amazing. No, I don't think anyone said that. When I go to bed is when I find peace of mind. Because that's sort of like, why are we going to bed? To find peace of mind.
yeah.
I mean, that's almost like a no-brainer, but why did it take this long for someone to say it? Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
A sports car.
If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
He was here.
They want to scent the glue in the binding. What smell would it be?
What is that? Beeswax.
Nice. They want to have some of the text in a color other than black ink. What color?
Light blue.
If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
Walpole, New Hampshire, and bronze.
Wow. Why that location?
Oh, that's where I'm going to be buried.
Oh, really? Wow. But you're a Canadian.
Yes.
Are
But
you happy?
My spouse is American, and we bought a plot there. And
I see. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Duck under and move over.
Pretty good for a philosopher. Okay, that was fun, Mark. I love when people laugh. So, Joseph Boy says, make the secrets productive. Lou Welsh said, guard the secrets, constantly reveal them. But it was Thornton Wilder in 1928. He said, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for 90 minutes. I'm really grateful. I'm not insinuating you haven't answered this, but what's it really all about for you, Mark?
Well, I just want to produce good work, and I had a conversation with a friend of mine, Stephen Marsh, who's also a writer and journalist. And he said, the only duty you have is to create a masterpiece. And I don't think I've done that yet, even with all the titles. So yeah, that's what keeps me going.
It's beautiful. Really well put. I love that. So we're going to bring Clinton on. I know he's been listening. He is a smart dude, and we were blown away by your presence at the Paulo's McLuhan Marathon. So I thank Paulo for exposing you to me through that, and I should have known about you before that. So go ahead, Clinton. You're on mute, dude.
Of course I am. Always the way.
I love that. I love the little mute card.
Yeah, you know what that is? That's a mug they're selling in the newspapers. So
right?
everybody, says, the cliche line is, "Grandma, you're on mute." And it's so much easier just to go.
And of course, Gerry, you wouldn't have the mug. You would have the newspaper clipping of the mug. That's very Gerry. That's a Gerry Fialka move, 100%. Yeah, no, fantastic interview, guys. We've done 54 of these, Mark, and every once in a while, I'm tempted to turn it into a sort of good cop, bad cop scenario, where Gerry comes along and he opens someone up and they share themselves, and then I always have them at a disadvantage because no one knows who the hell I am. I'm the technician behind the scenes, right? And never has it been more tempting than this. Right? I grew up in the I grew up in the rational, atheist, skeptical online community. I know all about Daniel Dennett. I'm a computer nerd to the core. I'm also an autodidact, completely alienated from all educational institutions, entirely exploring the difference between social cultural alienation and mere individualization from the tribe. So listening to you expound on and talk about some of your ideas, especially computers as thinking, or the way you gave a recursive potential telling of Plato's allegory of the cave, it's turtles all the way up, so to speak. You just filled me full of the potential for running out into the corner and starting a fight in the hockey rink, and or perhaps more productively engaging in some I guess what all these cyberneticist systems theory guys who've hoodwinked everyone sort of call oppositional processing, which I suppose is the nature of what dialectic ought to be. So just figuring out where to start with that, I'd like to, on a common point of reference, talk about the corporeality, which is a wonderful word. I'm really glad you used that word. The surface area of the skin explored by in art and in film, especially. Videodrome is one of my favorite films, right? I love Cronenberg, but Existenz specifically sort of is his film for me that deals with the recursive nature of, you never really know if you're in the dream or if you're in the VR video game, or if you've woken up, or if you've reached base reality. Are you a simulation theory guy? Do you believe in simulation theory?
Well, I guess yes and no. I mean, so I'm thinking of Nick Bostrom's version of this thesis, and I totally get the logic of the argument, and yet I find on a daily basis I can't really endorse it, because the hardness of the chair I'm sitting on, or the tastiness of the chicken I'm having for dinner, or whatever. I mean, I can imagine that theoretically as being generated, but I think it's great speculation. I think what I love about Bostrom is that he just keeps taking everything to the limit, right? Mm-hmm. So I would say, no, I don't endorse it, but I appreciate it.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. It's fun. Okay, let's look at it this way. People like to think of media, right? People want, or marketers tell people that they want, and people come to believe that they want more immersive media. So right now, we all are acting as though we're sitting around a table having a conversation across from one another in this teleconference, right? It would be nice. Our conversation would probably be even better and more involved if it were more immersive. If there were affordances in the technology that let us feel like you weren't just a head on a screen, but you were right in front of me. Let's say, right, all of these things. We want our movies to be immersive and more realistic. And yet, at the same time, when people are buying, self-help books, or when people are saying what it is, when marketers are selling people, either spiritual solutions or wellness solutions, or means to arrive at what you call the clarity of thought that helps them eliminate their biases and prejudices, the language often uses that of presence, right? I want to be here now. I want to be able to focus. I want to be able to hold my focus. I want to be able to have empathy for the people in front of me, right? So it's almost like that is immersion in the immediate world. Right? Like people are sort of saying, I want to be immersed in my dinner table with my family. I want to be immersed in the bar and be able to hop into a conversation at the next table, right? I want to be immersed in my double bed. I want to be immersed in the social scene itself. Are these two forms of immersion, media immersion in the fantasy and in the speculation, and immersion in the here and now and the actual world according to the physics as it is that science and technology uses and explains and exploits it, are these in tension? If we develop one, do we lose the other?
They're definitely in tension, in my view. I'm not sure they contradict each other, but I think there's a really good discourse to be had here. There's been some pushback, for example, on so-called immersive art exhibitions. This happened in my city recently. So they have a Van Gogh exhibition at the Art Gallery of Ontario. And I read some really interesting things that say, you know, this takes away from the stillness of art. And as you know, I said to Gerry, I'm an art collector myself, and it's the stillness of the works that comforts me. I don't want them to be moving around or, you know, having this kind of thing. And then if we mean immersive to be something like be here now, which is, you know, a phrase that's been around for a long time, I totally get behind that, because I think being in the present is very hard. You know, the future is anxiety and the past is depression. That's the sort of mantra. So you have to be in the present to have your life go some way that you want it to go. I don't know if that really answers the question, but
no, that really touches on some important parts for me. McLuhan, you know, would describe you know, in landscape painting and in the romantic poetry of the 18th century, right? It was the development of techniques to arrest a single moment of perception or cognition for detached, right, observance, right? To arrest as a static, still object something for contemplation.
Yes.
Long time contemplation along the frozen scene, right?
Yes.
And that's what the printed word did, was allow you to see a person's thoughts splayed out and arrested for your contemplation. You can read it as slowly as you want. You can go back again. It's frozen for that sort of effect that you attribute to static plastic arts.
Yeah.
Now, when I'm always here now when I'm alone in my room, but if I'm in a social setting as a socially anxious person, let's say, or as a socially awkward person, everyone else is moving around. It's like they're all playing double Dutch jump rope, right?
Yeah.
So now that becomes sort of becomes these two vying forms of immersion. If I can immerse myself in art when I'm all alone, or if I can immerse myself in the presence of the scene. Do you recognize how immersion as a shared embodied social activity differs from the fantasy of media content?
Yeah, you know, I love your example. Well, two examples. One is I used to be a good jump rope skill professional when I was in grade school. And I love double Dutch. And I'm also socially anxious and an introvert. But I before COVID especially, I go to a lot of parties, and I totally recognize what you're talking about, that feeling. So it's a kind of jumpiness, and I'm there, and I'm trying to be there, but it's always like, you know that feeling when you're talking to somebody and you're trying to connect, and they're looking over your shoulder to somebody else they want to be talking to.
Mm-hmm.
And those are those moments when I feel like, well, I should have just stayed at home, but I don't want to be a hermit. I want to interact with other people, and so I do get that difference that you're talking about, and I'm not sure immersion is the most helpful phrase here. We might want to come up with some other terminology.
Okay, no, I hope so. I hope to do so. Thank you. I guess what I'm setting up here, right? This has all been a long setup. If I had one point you made to contest, it would be: do artists have a moral obligation or responsibility? And I would say, do artists not have a moral obligation to lead people closer to immersion in their immediate embodied nowness in a social scene, and not further therefrom away with distracting spectacle?
Yeah, I mean, you could call that moral. I guess what I thought Gerry was asking, do they have a didactic duty? And I don't think they do. But if you parse moral as what you just said, yeah, I do think so. And I think most artists take that very seriously, which is opening up, doors of perception, to use a very old term, and showing us the world. And that's why I love art. That's why I collect art. That's why I teach about art. And I think that's essential. So I'm, again, it could be parsed as a moral obligation, but not in the traditional sense of an ethical obligation, like you have to follow this duty. It's more like, if you choose to be an artist, then you should try to do something like that. And all the great artists I know, and all the artists I know personally, do exactly that.
All right, I know I could go for hours, and I'm sure we'd all enjoy that. But I got one more question for you. And
Go ahead, please.
It would be, Professor Kingwell, as a man of lifelong academic affiliation, having gone and attended Yale, and now working at the University of Toronto, and spending your time with students, and working within those walls. Do you recognize the growing amount of strange, alienated autodidacts who are taking the affordances of new media to work entirely outside of that, and sort of making a chaos of things entirely outside of those walls, in the social arenas at large? And what advice would you give to those alienated from academic institutions, as to what their relationship should be with the former centers of learning in our civilization?
Well, this is tricky. So a lot of my students are extremely smart, but they're also often in pursuit of credentials because they want to climb a ladder. And then I know some people, not so much at their age, but people older, like a friend of mine in Boston, Joshua Glenn. I've done 3 books with him, and he left school to strike out on his own, and he's had a very good career. I think those people who decide not to go the credentialed route are very admirable. And there's no diminishment of intellectual contribution when somebody makes that choice. And I likewise think that inside the institution, there's this kind of anxiety about whatever GPA, GRE, all the things that, get you from one level to another. And I think that's unfortunate because I really feel like, and this was true for me, by the way, when I started university, all I really wanted to do was read books and talk to other people about the books that we'd read. Um, and I really didn't care about grades. And I see a little bit too much of that right now. I think we should go gradeless. I think that would be a really,
Really?
yeah, I think that would be a radical move, and see how that happens. But it's very unlikely to say the obvious.
That was brilliant, Clinton, because I think you're the leader of I wrote it down here, the post-Pomo Decon Toronto School. And we know Clinton could be the leader and the head professor, because we're lucky that he's stayed sort of street and hasn't gone, because he's totally capable of going PhD, piling it high and deep. But this has been truly enlightening, and your questions were great, Clinton, and I appreciate it, because just to give a quick little, I've done, Zooms for 18 months, and you've heard me say this, they're better than my 30 years of live events with people in a room. And I apologize. I say, I'm sorry to say, but people are more attentive, and we've never had anyone freak out until last week. This kid was off his meds, and he sort of went out of code of conduct for 2 meetings, and we handled it well. Everything worked, but nobody yells. They don't do the things they normally do in a room, in a setting. And it's like the productivity of the meetings is better. And I say, I'm sorry to say that. I do live in a world where I ride my bike and talk to my friends every day. And I'll say to them, Zooms are great. And we're doing a live Zoom right now. And I'll put up a frame because our heads are like this. But then, like you say, your party example, Mark, was, oh, they're looking over there. And the good example of that on Zoom is you can tell when somebody's present in a Zoom and they're doing email, because of their eyes, the way their eyes are doing. They're not truly there 100%. And so it doesn't happen that much. And I'm lucky because our attendees are usually there. But the one thing about art was, Marshall said, art is anything you can get away with. And I said that once, and this guy said, that sounds like Trump. And it was like, well, sorry. Yeah. So in closing, Mark, this has been truly enlightening, and we would love to have you back where we do what's called a McLuhan mashup, where it is Clinton, me, and you the whole time. So we have two series here. And so it was been like the last question in closing would be, Mark, what gives you the most optimism?
I guess it's the idea that, we're still here, we're learning, we're getting better in some ways, even though we're getting worse in others. But I presume to go with the getting better part.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're adapting.
Yeah, Marshall said it well. He said, evolution is adapting to exploration. And you did a great quote, which is a setup for our end quote when these go really well. You said in one of your talks, Mark, you retrieved the 60s. I think it was the Paris guys. Who were the Paris revolutionaries in the 60s? What were they called? The
like Jacques Lacan?
Situation.
Well, there's the situationists, but the soixante-huitard would
right,
the basic group. Yeah.
Well, who said be reasonable, demand the impossible?
It's not clear who said that, but it's certainly in tune with the situationists, and it became a great graffito on various places in Paris.
Well, we double that emotion, Mark, because communication of the new is a miracle, but it's not impossible with someone like you. Thank